Thank you so much for keeping it locked to Breakfast Central. From sport to the world of business. Today we'll be looking at some of the top 3 stories from the world of business that rocked the news cycles last week. I'm joined by Abiodun, who is the head of research of AfriInvest. Good morning and welcome. How are you today?
Good morning, I'm fine.
I'm excited to start doing the big 3 with Abiodun. I see you're dressed to the T, you're dressed the part.
That's just me.
That's just you. I love it. Looking very, very dapper. So let's start our trip today around, the business news from the continent. Let's start our trip in South Africa, where South African Airways, the business rescue team, has announced that it has been given access to $239 million from the state-owned Development Bank of Southern Africa to avert the airline's collapse. So the team will immediately draw 2 billion rand from the facility, as the airline has already cancelled some flights this month to save funds after the government missed a deadline to meet terms of its bankruptcy protection. Although South African Airways did express this as a consolidation. They didn't, their choice of wording was not cancellation. How are we feeling about this? Because South African Airways needs about between 4 and 5 billion rand to actually get out of the red. The state had pledged to help with a part of it. Now we're seeing the Development Bank coming in. What are the prospects? Is this going to make a difference?
All right, to put into context, I mean, the South African Airways, in terms of labor, contributes probably roughly 34,000 jobs cumulatively to the South African labor market. In terms of revenue, also, it contributes roughly about 1% to the $385 billion South African economy in terms of GDP. You get these debt figures also represent roughly something below the 1% number in terms of debt to GDP for the company. And I sort of understand that this, company has been dealing and struggling with debt numbers. So it's looking to raise, if you look at the total debt, we're probably looking close to the 14 billion rand level. And if you cascade that into two heads, you're seeing roughly about 10 billion rands, which are legacy debt, another roughly 4 billion rands, which are working capital sort of debt, which we gotten from banks, consortium of banks generally. So this new lifeline is getting from the state-owned company is just going to help support its working capital requirement for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. If you look back also 2018-2019, they got roughly another 5 billion rand from this same company just to support working capital. So it's probably, if you look at roughly 2-3 billion rand out of a total of about 14 billion, that's just a drop in the ocean. So it really doesn't fill in the gap. It doesn't fill in the gap. It's just going to help it meet up with short-term, day-to-day requirements, needs, and all. And
it's chiming in with all the other conversations going around around SOEs in South Africa. This is not the first time South African Airways is being bailed out, but we're seeing several state-owned enterprises in South Africa at the moment struggling. And, the general sentiment from the populace is that, is it possible that South African Airways is actually even self-sabotaging so that they can be privatized?
Okay, so yes, generally, there is this narrative around government running businesses across the world. There are just a very few places where you find airlines being run by governments, maybe in Qatar, in Dubai, maybe in Singapore. Elsewhere,
being run efficiently anyway.
Efficiently. So you're seeing a SAA that's been run very less efficiently. You're seeing levels of corruption in the system. So these are variables that will continue to impact and dent the performance of this company. And the way forward actually is for the government to open up to some sort of public-private partnership, if not complete privatization. That's just the way forward. The long term doesn't look so good with government trying to run businesses. The job of government is basically around policy formation, providing enabling business environment, and not to get into the ABCs of running business enterprises.
So your forecast is that we're not seeing the end of this. This is probably something that can abate a few symptoms for now, but not solve any of the carriers' problems.
Solve the problem.
Okay, well, we're still in SADC. We head over to Zimbabwe now, where the public workers accepted 140% pay hike. So that was starting this month, thereby averting a potential strike against President Emerson Mnangagwa's government. So soaring inflation has eroded salaries and savings in the country, which is grappling with its worst economic crisis in a decade, marked by shortages of foreign exchange, food, fuel, electricity, medicine, you name it. Now, you know, when I heard this news, my heart tore to shreds because as much as it seems like good news, when you look at 140% pay hike in a country whose inflation is no longer being reported because it's gone too out of control and they don't want a stigma attached to the nation. What is the immediate sort of, you know, consequence of this, you know, almost sort of, doubling of salaries?
Unofficial statistics put Zimbabwe inflation probably at the 520% level in 2019. That is massive. That's an economy that's also been dealing with drought as a result of global changes in climate conditions, which has impacted negatively on food, on agriculture production, on livestock farming. And farmers are complaining. Generally, living standards have dropped significantly. Poverty levels also have risen to very high levels. I think some numbers I saw put poverty levels at around 40%. I mean, 2018, 2019, which is quite high. So a country where you find inflation at around 500, let's even drop it to 300 and say 300 to 500% range. And then you're hiking salary, health worker salary by about 140%. I mean, look at those two numbers. It just shows one is clearly below the water. So these workers are still just going to be living below poverty line. A 140% increase in salary does not compensate for the increment you find in prices of food, basic commodities. It doesn't compensate for it.
It doesn't at all. Last week we saw billionaire Strive Masiwa come to the rescue of the junior doctors with, you know, the injection he made towards their allowances, which worked out to about $300 per worker for 2,000 workers. That's in the health sector. Nothing sustainable at all. I believe that will see them through for about 6 months. But, you know, you have reports coming from the United States government as well saying, you know, they're not going to assist in any way because they believe that Zimbabwe's problems are man-made. So what is the way out for this economy? If you can answer this question and solve this problem, you deserve a Nobel Peace Prize because we, the people of the nation, have suffered.
So let me just say that maybe a bit of a thumbs up for the president. I don't know how to pronounce his name though. I mean, health is key. Health is key. So regardless of the state of the economy, you still need to motivate your health workers because they basically help save lives. I know they're also dealing with sanctions from the US, from the European Union, from the IMF. I think one of the key things they need to do is to go back to the table to sort of negotiate with the US.
Okay, so you buy into the narrative that sanctions are actually affecting the economy.
Sanctions coupled with corruption and, you know, inefficiencies across. But I think if they can go back to the drawing table and hold negotiations with the US, with the IMF, with the EU, to just sort of get the situations, get the perception around them sorted out. This will sort of help inflows back into the economy, help foreign exchange investment back into the economy, which if rightly invested, the positive effect would cut across different sectors, and then there will be a sort of improvement in living standard, which basically will restore the whole economy back to the path of prosperity, in my opinion.
So it's now time for us to shift our focus to MTN, which has pledged to invest $1.6 billion to expand its operations in Nigeria. That's after settling the latest major dispute with authorities in its most profitable market. So Africa's largest wireless carrier announced the investment after a meeting between senior executives, including Chief Executive Officer Rob Shutter and Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari recently. So these are conversations had at the highest level. Not surprising that it almost seems like a trade, But you'll give us the analysis on this. Is it a coincidence that a massive injection is made just after there's an agreement to drop, the massive fines and some of the things that MTN was facing as a business in Nigeria?
I buy that it's a coincidence.
It's a coincidence. Fine, no problem.
I mean, whether it's a coincidence or it's not a coincidence, the fact is they were just about to be fined another $2 billion for backing taxes. And then somehow, the AGF backed off. And then recently, they had a meeting. And in the meeting, they're pledging to invest about $1.6 billion. $1.6 billion is just $400 million away from $2 billion.
But at least this is something that's going to go into operations. What is this money supposed to go towards, actually?
Okay, so for now, there's really not a lot of details or clarification as to where or the intended use of the money. But top of my head, I probably think they will be looking at, expanding their services, expanding coverage. I mean, upgrading network capacity. Recently, they launched, was it 4G? I mean, I would expect them to be targeting a 6G, I mean, then also to add to that, they're looking at mobile money activity. Yeah, I know they do this, but then in a way, I expect they would scale up on that also. That requires some bit of investment also. So yeah, I think this is going to go into channeling or growing the services, growing their network, upgrading. Top of my head, that's just what I think.
And what are the chances of MTN being compliant with regulations this time around? Historically, they haven't always erred on the right side of the law with regards to telco regulation. Yeah. Do we see them playing ball this time, or is there a sentiment that, well, now that you have a direct line to the president, we'll break a few rules, and if they fine us 10 billion, then we'll just pledge to invest another 8 billion to make it all go away?
No.
Is there a precedent that's being set by
for a company of that size? Corporate governance is very key. If historically they've been known to break rules and flout laws, I think now they're a listed company. The eyes on them are more. Corporate governance levels is stricter now, so I would expect a higher level of compliance from them. I wouldn't expect to see an MTN that would, just because you have a direct line to the president, you want to just break rules. I don't think so. It comes at a cost, which also impact on the value of the business, impact on the value of the company. We analysts, we do our valuation. We'll factor in some of these things. And then when these things are too much, you see investors react negatively. They're planning to do an IPO sooner or later. So they need this positive news, these positive narratives around them to drive sentiment for the business. So I don't expect them to, on a going forward basis, willingly or out of whatever reason, just choose to flaunt rules.
Okay. So having said that, is this a green light towards the IPO? Is this, the road to that in essence?
In quotes, yes, it is a green light for it. It is a green light because any positive development that puts the company in a good position would help sell the issue or the issuance. Yes.
Okay, so it looks like positive news for the MTN group, but we're keeping our eyes on this because, as I said earlier, not always the best behaved group on the scene, but, certainly somebody will be keeping a watchful eye on. Possibly this is the year that we'll finally see, that IPO hit the market. And any indications of dates of that, or is it still?
For now, no indication of a date yet. But I think within the first half of 2020, they likely should come to the market.
Very soon. That's very, very soon. Abiodun, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for taking us from South Africa to Zimbabwe and to Nigeria. Abiodun Kerepe, well done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
To watch more videos just like this, make sure you subscribe right here. And of course, check out more videos right here.